What is up, everybody? My name's Big Cam, and today we're doing something a little different. We are recapping all of Daredevil, Netflix's Daredevil Season 1 in preparation for next Tuesday, March 4th, when Daredevil Born Again comes out. And I am so excited, and there are so many different places and things that Daredevil Charlie Cox has shown up in. He was in 3 seasons of Daredevil. He did 1 season of the Defenders show. He showed up as Matt Murdock as Peter Parker's lawyer in Spider-Man No Way Home. He showed up as a lawyer in She-Hulk's girlfriend in She-Hulk and She-Hulk Buck. So I love to see that, you know, in the yellow and red suit looked really good. I really loved his cameo in Echo. His black suit in Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, where Charlie Cox just has to play Daredevil and voice him in every universe. Loved to see him in animation form. And now he's coming back almost a decade later for Daredevil Born Again, because this first episode in first season aired April 10th of 2015. So almost a decade to date when this show will be coming back for its 4th season, or Daredevil Born Again Season 1 here on Netflix, or here on Disney Plus. But a couple of Daredevil Born Again posters, I just really love this like hand-drawn poster, and it kind of, you know, inspires me to think about the graffiti art that Muse, one of the villains for Daredevil Born Again, might be, you know, painting on walls and stuff like that. And you know, that show's gonna be wild. But a couple posters from this Netflix Daredevil series. I love this like bullseye poster. Maybe this will be the poster I use for season 3 of Daredevil in this Netflix series. But this Matt Murdock we get here is the Black Mask, the man in the mask. He's not quite Daredevil yet. It takes him all the way till episode 13 of this first season to become Daredevil. What we get most of the time here is the man in the mask, or we get Matt Murdock, you know, the blind man that's the lawyer in Hell's Kitchen. And we're gonna go on this journey to find out how he becomes Daredevil. And this will be a longer episode, I apologize, but it is a recap of the entire first season, and each episode going through it episode by episode. And instead of going through and making individual videos for each episode, I'm trying to recap it all as tight as possible in one giant video. So bear with me, folks. This will be a long one, but Daredevil Born Again's coming up, so it will be much quicker than you trying to watch 13 episodes in one season, you know, or 3 13-episode seasons, right? Like you have to watch 39 episodes by Tuesday. I'm trying to help you out here. Recap, give you something to watch that you can watch, get the whole picture, but not have to waste all of the time. You know what I'm saying? Save you some time and give me some followers and viewers and some people watching Daredevil and interacting with me as we head into Daredevil Born Again. I'll be breaking down those episodes as well. So we're going to have some fun here heading into Daredevil Born Again Season 1. And Season 2's already greenlit and starting to film. So very exciting stuff. Can't wait. But we kick right off with Matt's origin in episode 1, titled Into the Ring. And Matt's origin, we see him that he pushed an old man out of the way and from like a truck accident, and he was gonna get hit by a car, and the old man's like, "Your boy saved my life, he's a hero." And we see chemicals get into young Matthew's eyes, but he was a hero long before he ever got his superpowers, you know what I mean? But this poor kid gets chemicals in his eyes and causing him to go blind, and we also see his father's over him as like the last thing that he actually sees with clear 20/20 vision is his father, Jack Murdock, who is a boxer, standing over him. Then we cut to older Matt as a lawyer and very Catholic, and crime is rampant in Hell's Kitchen, and Matt's trying to fight back with the law, but at night we see the man in the mask. A not so stellar suit, pretty much just a mask over his eyes. We meet lovable Matt's best friend, Franklin Nelson, aka Foggy Nelson, who is played by Elden Henson, who I absolutely love and is perfect as Foggy in this series. And we catch up with them as they are getting their office for their first day at their new law firm, Nelson and Murdock. We then meet Deborah Ann Wolfe, who is playing Karen Page, as she wakes up with a knife in her hand, covered in blood, and a dead body next to her, but she's claiming she didn't do this. And she gets arrested, and Matt and Foggy end up going to be her lawyers in where she's, you know, going to meet her where she's locked up in jail. And it's crazy to see them all like in this pilot episode of Daredevil and going back and watching this, you know, pretty much a decade later, because they're all so young and they're all like still have this great connection and chemistry, but they are so young. And it seems that Karen was drugged and framed for this murder of this man for what she knows about the Union Allied construction company she used to work for. Someone then tries to kill Karen in jail, and Matt and Foggy get her released, and Matt says she can stay with him for a while because she's afraid to go back to her house, and he's like, just to make sure you're alright, you can come back and stay with me. And she asks him if he remembers what it was like before he was blind, and he's like, I really should say I don't miss it, but I'd give anything to see the sky one more time. And you're like, ooh, this poor blind man, you know, but he wasn't born blind, right? So he remembers being somebody that could see and being a kid, and you know, he's only had to change in his life and grow now with his blindness, and you know, but can't tell people he has abilities type of thing, so he has to pretend to be just a weak little blind man that's a lawyer walking through the city, but at night he is the man in the mask fighting crime. Back at Matt's apartment though, Matt questions Karen, and he asks her about, listen, they didn't kill you the first time. Why would they, you know, try and kill you in prison the second time, but they didn't try and kill you the first time? Maybe they're trying to switch their tactics up, and, you know, maybe they thought, well, we'll scare you the first time and frame you for murder and you'll go to jail, but then maybe the scene of the crime didn't have the evidence that they needed to, you know, so something's not adding up, so they try and kill her in prison or jail so that she doesn't get a chance to talk at a court case or a jury or to other police officers or to lawyers, you know, just kind of clean it up real quick. But she doesn't get killed and, you know, ends up back at Matt's house, and Matt's like, why would this happen? And unless you have something that they want. And she lies to Matt about having the Union Allied pension file, which she, you know, with his super hearing, he can tell that she's lying, which is just one of his many abilities. With his, you know, blind took away his sight, but all of his other senses are super tuned up to 11 so that he can do crazy stuff and be a superhero and be Daredevil. We then see that the real Union Allied is a man named Nobu, which we'll see more later this season, Madame Gao, Leland Owlsley, the Russians, and the employer's representative, James Wesley. And we'll learn who the employer is very soon. Karen sneaks out of Matt's place in the middle of the night though, but luckily for her, the man in the mask is there to save her when she goes back to her apartment to get the Union Allied pension file, and some man is waiting for her in the shadows trying to kill her and wait for her to come back and get this file. But the man in the mask, aka Matt, followed her once she left his house and was able to save her once this man attacked her. And you really see early on here, man, can Matt really take a beating? But oh boy, can he fight. Matt beats up the thug and takes the Union Allied pension file and the thug and ties him up in, you know, the guy that tried to kill Karen, ties him up with the file and drops him on the New York Bulletin so that the file and evidence doesn't just get given to police and then, you know, wiped out by Union Allied and the people trying to cover this up. So if he goes right to the press, now this is out in the reports and out in the news feeds, now people know about it, you know, so they can't hide in the shadows any longer. We then hear the voice of James Wesley talking to his employer, telling him about the New York Bulletin running the Union Allied file, and we still haven't seen who the employer is, but we hear the voice of Vincent D'Onofrio, who will be playing Wilson Fisk this season. But just like they tease him little bits at a time, right? Like, this is going to be the big villain over a 3-season arc. Why bust your load in the first episode, right? Like, tease it. Show us just little bits and pieces of him over time until the big reveal happens, you know what I mean? Karen then cooks for Foggy and Matt to thank them as she joins Team Nelson and MURDOCK as their, you know, free intern assistants. And then the episode ends, we see Matt training at a gym, a boxing gym, alone. A little memory of his father, but he's got to stay in shape to fight crime. But he fights in this gym after hours, and the lights can be turned off, and he does it alone so that nobody realizes what this blind man can do fighting-wise. But also, you know, just gets a little bit of But as he's beating up the bags in the gym, we see a montage of all the criminals at work in the Hand and the different Union Allied members of the city, all having crime running rampant throughout the city. And yeah, it's a big mess. But credits roll in episode 1, and that leads us into episode 2, titled Cut Man. And this title is referring to Matt, young Matt, being his father battling Jack Murdock's Cut Man, which is a boxing term for the guy in the boxer's corner that is the guy that, you know, patches up cuts or puts a little Vaseline in the cut so it's not bleeding in his eyeball while he's trying to fight. Or, you know, I mean, you guys have seen Rocky. The guy that would cut the lids if he had to, you know, like, Rocky reference, but, you know, boxers, Matt battling Jack, right? Like, so Cut Man comes from that term, but it's also referring to how Claire, played by Rosario Dawson, this episode will be Matt's Cut Man. And this episode doesn't pick up right where the last episode left off. It opens with Matt bleeding out in a dumpster, and a young man and Claire find Matt dying, bleeding to death in a dumpster. And they fish him out of the dumpster, and Claire, once again, is played by Rosario Dawson, one of the greats. I love Rosario Dawson. So Claire, being the nurse that she is, starts to try and clean him up and stitch him up with the stab wounds he has in his body. And she sees his eyes and face, you know, takes the mask off and is like, listen, your eyes aren't responsive to light and that's not freaking you out. So either you're blind or, you know, something's really wrong with you. And he's like, do I have to pick one? She's like, okay, what the hell's a blind man doing beat up half to death in a dumpster? And he's like, the less you know about me, the better. So their relationship starts off quite complicated at first, but, you know, it is what it is. We then see a flashback of young Matty sleeping in the kitchen waiting for his dad to get home from a fight, and Jack tells him, hey, take a shot of scotch, I don't need your hand shaking like last time, before young Matt stitches up his dad. So like even young blind Matt is still very clearly capable because he's his father's Cut Man. He's stitching up his father and he can't even see. Talented young boy. We also see here that Jack made a lot of money for losing his fight. And Matt and his father saying it's not about how hard you hit the mat, it's about how you get up, right? Like, so, also kind of almost a Rocky term. It's not about how hard you get hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. And all the, you know, stupid Sylvester Stallone boxing quotes. Guys that have been hit in the head too much, you know what I'm saying? We then see Foggy take Karen out to go bar hopping to clear their head because they don't want to go home, but they can't stay at the office, so they go out and he tries to cheer her up and go bar hopping. So then Claire, you know, trying to find out more about Matt, she's like, listen, what do I say about a blind guy if he dies in my apartment, and what's your name? And he's like, the less you know about me, the better. She's like, okay, I'll call you Mike, a guy she used to date who turns out he's good at keeping secrets too. And so, you know, you're like, ah. And Matt thanks her, but, you know, at this moment, she only knows him as Mike. But, you know, I do love Claire so much, and she's a great character. And this episode 2 is a fire episode. It just, you know, the way that they start out this season, the first 2, 3, 4 episodes are, like, so good. And the cliffhangers are so good that you're like, God damn it, I have to click the next episode and keep going. We also find out that Matt is hurt here and stabbed wounds and bleeding out because he was hunting down the Russians who, you know, took this young boy, but he was thinking, oh my god, I'm doing great, I tracked down the Russian so quick, but it was a trap and he should have known better, and he walked right into this trap. And, you know, this is very early days of Matt being Daredevil, so he's still got a lot to learn, but Matt learns best through pain, you know? Kind of like one of my favorite tattoos on my arm here. Sometimes you must hurt in order to know, fall in order to grow, lose in order to gain, because most life's lessons are learned through pain. And Matt learns best through pain. We also then learn one of Matt's other abilities is super smell, and he can smell a man's cologne from the 3rd floor. And he can also take quite a beating, but he gets that from his father. We also learn that Jack was in with some wise guys, and they're trying to make him take a fall in his next fight, and he doesn't want to do it, you know, but he's, you know, in with these wise guys, and one of them's named Rigoletto and stuff like that. New York in probably, what, the 70s, 80s, maybe 90s. Cutting back to the present day, we then see Matt knock out the smelly fake Russian cop with a fire extinguisher from like multiple floors up, and he just times it as the guy's walking down, lets go of the fire extinguisher, hits him in the head, knocks him out. Claire's like, who the hell is this blind guy and why could he see so much? Matt then has Claire and the other boy that was scared, that saw everything happen from the floor above. And Matt's like, go get him. I'll need his help. We gotta carry this guy to the roof. And she's like, the roof? So less of a chance of the building hearing him scream. So Matt's going to go torture this guy on the roof. We then see Foggy and Karen go to Foggy's favorite bar, Josie's, which shall return in Daredevil Born Again. And then Matt and Claire talk to the guy on the roof, and he's unconscious. And Claire's like, how do you know he's unconscious? And he's like, I can hear his breath. I can hear his heartbeat. You know, he's unconscious. She's like, how can a blind guy I find half dead in a dumpster be a vigilante that can tell if a guy is unconscious or smell him from floors away? Plus, not to mention, he can take an incredible amount of pain without even a single complaint. And he just goes, that last part's Catholicism. The big laugh from me. It gets a big laugh every time I see it. Claire then helps Matt torture the man with medical techniques and goes, if you hit him right here, it won't kill him, but it will hurt really, really bad. So Matt, you know, uses this technique and tortures this man, and he ends up getting the man to talk and tell him the location of the boy that Matt was trying to save earlier in the episode that got him hurt in the first place. Matt then drops the guy off the roof into the dumpster he was in at the start of this episode, putting him in a coma, but he'll live. We then flash back to Matt's father, Jack, betting on himself and double-crossing the Mafia wise guys in winning the fight, which sets up Matt to have quite a bit of inheritance and money in the bank, but maybe Matt used all of this for his apartment, because we still don't see him necessarily flashing a whole bunch of money bags around, you know what I mean? But he is a lawyer, probably put himself through law school, that type of thing. So, you know, maybe he's used up all that money that his father left for him, buying the apartment, going to law school, that type of thing. Because we see now in, like, later She-Hulk, you know, and even probably in Daredevil Born Again, he's had to take some different cases to make money as a lawyer, not just be the lawyer saving the good people and the people telling the truth, you know, like he wants to do early in this season 1 and be Mother Teresa, if you would. But because Jack double-crossed the Mafia and the mob guys, they come immediately afterwards and they're like, you were supposed to take a fall on the 5th, and they shoot him and he dies while Maddie's standing over his body yelling, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy! And then we cut to the best part of this episode, a hallway sequence, oneer, that is absolutely awesome, where Matt goes and saves this boy. And this hallway sequence is phenomenal, and it's like a oneer, and it keeps going back and forth, and he kicks like 5-10 guys' asses all on, you know, 10 on 1. And then, you know, as he's about to open the door to go save the kid, he like picks up the mask, walks in, and he's like, it's okay. I'm gonna take you to your dad now. Come on, let's go. And, you know, puts the mask back down, but we see him carrying out the kid, and it's like, yeah, dude, Matt's a fucking G. Matt's a real hero. But that, you know, credits roll in episode 2, and that leads us into episode 3, titled Rabbit in a Snowstorm. And this episode opens with a man murdering somebody in a bowling alley. And this is the Prohaska we kept hearing about in the last episodes. And the Prohaska we'll hear throughout the future episodes is the man who was murdered here by this guy with the bowling alley, with a bowling ball in the bowling alley. We then see Ben Urich, a great reporter, the one from the Bulletin that wrote the Union Allied article and many other articles before this. Almost like Daredevil's Lois Lane, you know, at like the New York Bulletin though. The charming professional asshole Wesley shows up and offers Nelson and MURDOCK a bunch of money to be on retainer for his employer, but wouldn't give the name of like his employer or who his name was, like wouldn't tell them anything, so he's being a bit cagey. Foggy's like, listen, if you could see the numbers on this check, you wouldn't care. We would just go to work for this guy. And Matt's like, you know, blind, and he's like, well, maybe if you couldn't see the numbers on the check, you would care. And I'm like, ooh, dude, great writing for, you know, blind little quips back to his best friend. Matt then decides to go represent the man, though, because, you know, he's trying to find out more about who these Union Allied guys are and who the employer is and who this Wesley guy is, and, like, just coming in and just offering them a bunch of money to go represent this murderer. Like, okay, why? Foggy doesn't like this new client, though, as he calls him a shark in a skin suit, which honestly reminds me of Men in Black I just watched recently, in Men in Black 2, I think it is, where Kingpin Vincent D'Onofrio plays Edgar, who is a like alien cricket bug who ends up wearing Edgar's skin as a skin suit. You know, like, and it's like, oh, well, shark in a skin suit, not too far off for this murderer here. And the murderer just says to Matt, all you need to know about my employer is that his check will clear. Ooh. But we find out Wesley and Union Allied have been strong-arming members of the jury and rigging the case, so the case isn't fair, and the case gets dismissed or dropped, and Mr. Healy, the guy that was the murderer, just ends up going free. But Matt, being the man in the mask when the law doesn't work, Daredevil has to come make it work, and the man in the mask fights Healy in a alley and ends up getting Fisk's name from him. 3 episodes in, at the very end of the 3rd episode, we just now are getting who the employer's name is with Wilson Fisk. And then because this guy gave up his name, he impales himself on a piece of metal through his eyeball. And I kind of have a little clip of this. I don't know if it will be copyrighted or not, but it is gory and it's crazy stuff that they're showing 3 episodes in. You know, really setting the tone that this is not the MCU. This is a darker take on the character. And if this is the Netflix Daredevils in season 1, just imagine how dark the Daredevil Born Again is gonna have to be to set the tone of where this show can go in the MCU with a Marvel budget, right? Like, just absolute insanity. But yeah, this guy murders himself just because he's like, I can't hide, I can't leave the city. Fisk will find me for giving up his name and kill him. And Healy's like, you should have killed me, you coward, and then kills himself, right? So Matt's sitting there like, what the fuck? This guy was willing to murder himself just for giving up Fisk's name? He's like, who am I dealing with? Because we still haven't even seen Wilson Fisk yet until this last shot of this episode where we see Rabbit in the Snowstorm and Wilson Fisk is at Vanessa's gallery looking at a painting titled Rabbit in the Snowstorm, which is a white painting that reminds him of his childhood wall that we'll get to later this season. And Wilson Fisk is a big, giant, imposing, bald man, and Vincent D'Onofrio plays him to perfection. And Wilson Fisk here is going to be a pivotal character throughout the rest of this season and throughout the series of Daredevil, and then into Hawkeye and into Echo and now into Brave Daredevil Born Again, and I'm guessing even past Daredevil Born Again into Avengers and whatever else. Maybe they'll keep it just in Daredevil Born Again, but I would not be surprised if we see these guys interacting with some of the broader world outside of Daredevil Born Again. But the episode 3 ends on Vanessa asking him, you know, how does this painting make you feel? And he says it makes him feel alone. And it's like, But this piece of art will be pivotal to Wilson's story going forward in this series as like present day and also past Wilson and what made him into the man he is today. But we get into episode 4 titled In the Blood. But episode 4, In the Blood, opens with a flashback 8 years ago in a prison, and we start to learn more about the Russian brothers, Vladimir and his brother here. What is his other brother's name? Vladimir and like Alexei or something? I don't know. But Vladimir is the one on the left, and he is the one that most of the Russian, goons fear. Or I think it's Vladimir and Anatoly, maybe. But either way. They're brothers though, and they don't fight with each other. They're like, the head of the Russian mob. We then cut over to Matt in the present day fighting the Russians, but Claire ends up having to stitch him up again, and she thinks maybe he should get some body armor, and he's like, I'm working on it, alright? We learn from Wesley talking to the Russians that the Prohaska business in the last episodes and murdering Prohaska was able to double the Russians' business, and now they have this taxi company, Veles Taxis. And the guy Matt tortured and threw off a roof is in a coma, but the Russians go to wake him up for information, and he tells them about a woman. So they start to go look for Claire and get to her to get to the guy in the mask, you know what I mean? So Matt's vigilanteism is already starting to drag other people into his underworld and darkness and chaos, and he doesn't want anybody to get hurt. But this is the problem with being a vigilante, is that you create enemies, and then your enemies want to hurt their enemies' loved ones, right? Like, So poor Claire. We see Fisk goes back to Vanessa's gallery to ask her out, and she's like, you're not going to offer to buy the whole gallery? Some guy offered to do that once, and he says a woman that can be bought isn't worth having. So she agrees to go out on a date with him. We see the Russians come and kidnap Claire, and she calls Matt as she's getting kidnapped, so we just hear screaming and clawing. She tries to get, the phone, but she gets dragged away, and Matt springs into action and, is jumping on rooftops and running to her apartment as fast as possible and frantically looking for clues on where she might have went. And the young man that helped pull Matt out of the dumpster tells him that he saw a taxi, but they weren't, in the back of it. They were driving it like it was theirs. And this now then leads Matt to the taxi company, Veles Taxis. We see Wilson and Vanessa have dinner, and we learn little bits and pieces of his backstory and telling her that he lived at a farm when he was a boy. We see the man in the mask come to save Claire. She's being tortured by this Russian man with a baseball bat. And this whole scene, I was like, poor Rosario Dawson really looks like she's taking a beating. She's beat up, she's bloody, and she's an OG, she could take it. But I was like, damn, don't hurt my girl Rosario like that. So then Matt has to kill the lights and take out each one of these Russians one at a time and take all of them out, and it's like one on a whole bunch, but he still manages to take all of them out and save Claire, and Claire has a good cry in his arms, and it's like, ooh, at least he got to her and saved her. It could have been real bad. I thought they were going to kill Claire off in episode friggin' 4 here already in this season. I was like, no, you can't kill Claire, hurt my soul. One of the brothers, Russian brothers, Anatoly, goes, hey, this is a real problem. We were supposed to get information out of the girl. We didn't even get information. He came and beat up all our guys. He now knows where one of our, locations is at. Like, I should go bend the knee to Fisk and we should accept his help, like Wesley was trying to tell them earlier in the episode. And Vladimir doesn't want to, but Anatoly's like, let me go bend the knee. So he says, okay, fine, you go do it. So this is also a very bad move, though, because one of the Russian brothers comes in to bend the knee to Fisk, but decides to come in and talk to him as he's having a night out with Vanessa. And this is a big mistake, but we also see that this isn't a real date, because many of the other couples and people that were on dates in the restaurant stand up when this guy comes in, and this is all just members of Wilson Fisk's security team. So Vanessa's like, what the fuck is happening here? And Fisk just kind of awkwardly rushes her out and takes her home and tells Wesley to put Anatoly in a friggin' car. But back at Matt's place, it's now his turn to patch up Claire, and they're now holding hands, and they're like cute, and you're like, oh, maybe they're gonna kiss. And now, 4 episodes in, Claire finally gets to know that his name isn't Mike, and that his name is Matt. We then see Wilson drop off Vanessa, and the Russian stunt almost seems to have ruined his chances with her, so he goes to deal with the Russian brother for embarrassing him in front of Vanessa and slams his head in a car door until decapitation. And Wilson Fisk is by far a crazy murdering psychopath, as blood's dripping off of this Escalade or whatever, Suburban, and Wilson Fisk just showing you that he is not only a businessman and smart in suits and whatever, he is a big, strong, ferocious man that is capable of committing great atrocities of violence with his bare hands, you know what I mean, and just killing this guy because he was embarrassed. But as he's, beating the hell out of this guy, blood splatters on Wesley's face, so this is maybe where In the Blood comes from. We also see that the brother tries to swing a knife at Fisk, and it cuts his jacket, but it doesn't, go through it. And we see kind of it's like a Kevlar armor that he has made out of his suits. And then the episode ends with Wilson staring into camera with blood on his face, and Wesley comes over and gives him a little friggin' napkin. He starts cleaning off his face. Wesley's like, what should we do now? And Wilson's like, take what's left to him and send it to his brother. And Wesley's like, it will start a war. And he's like, I'm counting on it. And the credits roll in episode 4, leading us into episode 5, World on Fire. And this title refers to Matt talking to Claire, and she says, for a blind guy, you see so much, and ask him what does he actually see, and his answer is a world on fire. And we see kind of an impressionistic painting of Rosario Dawson's face made out of fire. which is cool. But also, you know, she's like, if all I saw was a world on fire, all I'd want to do is punch people too. And then they kiss, and it's like they have a sweet little moment, and it's like, oh, Matt and Claire, I hope they really do fall in love, boyfriend, girlfriend. I would love that. But, you know, Matt's a complicated man, so I doubt it. Wesley shows up the next day to talk to Vladimir like Fisk didn't kill his brother, and then all of a sudden he's like, where's your brother? We should talk about business. What happened? And then all of a sudden the body gets found and comes in with a headless body of his brother, and Wesley's like, oh man, what happened here? And then the body has a black mask on it. So Wesley planted a black mask on this body so that the Russians would handle their man in the mask problem, and also, you know, not divert attention towards Wilson Fisk, you know, killing his brother, and pin the blame on the man in the mask. And now people are fearing the man in the mask because he took off a Russian's head, you know. So now, even though Matt didn't do it, people are fearing him as this murderer. And it's like, oh, Wesley's a smart little bastard, but he's dirty, and I don't like him. We then see Nelson and MURDOCK represents Mrs. Cardenas, a wonderful old Spanish woman, and she's being strong-armed by Fisk and the Union Allied people as well as all of the other residents in her building for trying to get the property for Nobu. And Nobu wants this building for a reason that we'll see later this season and into season 2, actually. She says Foggy's a good man, he's going to help Mrs. Cardenas and do the right thing, and she ends up cooking a meal for them, and it's kind of a date between Karen and Foggy this time, because they're trying to help Miss Cardenas, and the only way she can really pay them at the current moment is by cooking them a good meal, because he's like, even though the law can't help her at the moment, Foggy's still going to do everything he can to help her, you know, patch up her drywall, call his cousin that does drywall work. He knows an electrician they helped get out of some legal trouble, right? So he's like, I'm going to do everything I can to help you. We're going to get people in your building to help. And she's like, oh, Foggy's such a good man, so handsome. I'm going to cook for you. No worries. So he cooks for Karen. She cooks for Karen and Foggy, and they kind of have a little date here in her apartment. We then see Matt is in the police station, and he hears a man being interrogated, and he says Fisk's name, which makes Matt perk up. And then these two dirty cops, both dirty detectives, fake a scene that this man tried to go for their gun and punched one of the other detectives, and then shoot the man, murder him in prison. They're in jail, like right in the interrogation cell. And Matt has to listen to all of this and can't do anything about it. And he just has to like listen because he's not Daredevil. He can't just be like, someone's about to get murdered. They'd be like, how the fuck does this blind guy know? Right? Like, but you know, so he hears this all go down, this man get murdered, and Matt's just like, can't do anything, and he's slowly realizing that like Daredevil and the man in the mask is really the only answer and the only way that he can get back at these guys, but he is way over his head. But we see Vanessa is willing to have date number 2 with Wilson, and this time he rents out the restaurant entirely. We then see Vladimir and the Russians find out that Fisk is playing them. And Matt goes to take out on the town and goes out as the man in the mask. And Claire, just when you think they're going to date, Matt decides to be Daredevil and doesn't choose his words so correctly. So looks like maybe not. And they go out and you're like, I wanted them to be together, but maybe not. Maybe it's not going to work out. Vanessa asks Wilson questions over dinner, and he says, I don't like to be questioned, but with you I will answer anything you have to ask honestly. So he is quite honest with her. And she asks him about his cufflinks that are very synonymous with this character. And the first time we actually see this character in Hawkeye, it's through the cufflinks. And the cufflinks return in Echo, and I'm sure they'll return in Daredevil Born Again. And Vanessa says she knows he's a dangerous man. That's why she brought a gun to a dinner date. And he's like, would you like me to leave? And she's like, no, I'd like a reason to stay. Wilson says he takes no pleasure in cruelty, but this city needs to die before it can be reborn. Maybe born again, one may say, in the future of this character becoming a political figure in Daredevil Born Again. Like, ooh. I was like, wow, it's crazy how season 1 wording can like try to tie into things in the future. You're like, wow, that kind of crazy, great writing right there. But as we see in this first 3 seasons, Kingpin goes on a long journey, but now he's gone on a super long journey to get back to a political standing in the Mayor Fisk level of power where we're going to see him at in Daredevil Born Again. So we see like a whole arc of this character through these 3 seasons of Daredevil, but then by Daredevil Born Again, this is a whole new character, really. Like, same guy, but, you know, now he's born again, right? Like, he's gone through a whole nother life and now is seen as this other figure. We see Matt find an operation of blind people working in this heroin operation, but someone walks in and a bomb goes off. And then as Foggy and Karen are having dinner, more bombs go off outside of Miss Cardenas, and Miss Cardenas is hurt and Foggy's hurt, and they're like gotta run through the building and make sure nobody else is hurt, but they end up going to the hospital. We then cut back to Vanessa and Fisk at dinner with a perfect view watching the bombings go off in the city, and he says to Vanessa the bad man he told her about have been taken care of and won't be bothering this city any longer, and she says good. So she knows he's a bad man and that he does bad things, but still loves him anyways. So honestly, find you someone that loves you like Vanessa loves Kingpin. We see Matt survives the bomb just narrowly and goes after Vladimir on foot, and cops pull up, heading to a giant cliffhanger that makes you want to start the next episode immediately, where the man in the mask has Vladimir and the Russians, you know, at his feet, and you know, but he has to put his hands up as cops pull up behind him, and we're like, oh shit, is Matt about to get arrested as the man in the mask as these cops pull up on him and the Russians after this bombing? Like, it's crazy, but it's so crazy that like we see Vanessa looking, clutching her pearls at this bomb going off, and then as she stands next to him like, good. I hope none of these fucking criminal bad men in this city that are murdering and hurting children, I hope all of them died in these bombings so that Mike Wilson can be the kingpin of this city. And you're like, whew, she's a dark bitch. But I love her. So we head into episode 6 titled Condemned. And we start this next episode off right where we left off with Matt getting cuffed by one of these cops, but he finds out that these are dirty cops, and so he, you know, fights his way out of it, finds his way to get the handcuffs off, and he takes Vladimir into a building nearby to question him. But Vladimir is dying, so he uses a road flare to cauterize his wound and save his life so that he can question him. But we see that Ben Urich, the reporter, shows up on this scene of this crime, and news reporters are showing up and detectives, and they got the building surrounded. And this is a big scene here for Daredevil, and all he wants is just to find Vladimir and find out what he knows about Fisk. But we also see that, you know, the leader of the bulletin is giving out the locations of where all the bombs went off, and Ben, just from knowing the locations of the bombs, knows that all of them were Russian locations. So, you know, clearly not just random bombing attacks. This is somebody going after the Russians. But when Matt uses the flare to cauterize Vladimir's wound, a young rookie cop hears the screams of Vladimir, and the rookie cop of 2 months on the job isn't working for Fisk. He hasn't gotten to him yet, but the rookie wants to be a hero and calls out for backup. And Matt's like, God damn it, all you had to say was, you know, all clear, nothing here, false alarm, you know, but he goes, 5th floor, and then Matt has to knock him out, and he's like, what the hell, this rookie cop just ruined everything. Matt's not big on guns, so he like takes the gun apart and throws it down at Vladimir. It's like, oh good, little stick, so much better. This little scene with like Vladimir the Russian talking to Matt, like Daredevil, and like really, you know, having a good conversation, and you're like, wow, Vladimir's kind of a gangster, but like, you know, he's not wrong with a lot of the things he says to Matt. But Vladimir tells Matt that Fisk is working with cops, politicians, and Chinese in their heroin. And Matt's like, wait, what? And he's like, you really don't know anything. But Vlad has one last wind in him and starts to try and fight Matt. And they go crashing through a few floors as Matt, you know, pile drives them through floors of this abandoned building. Karen's panicking because she can't get a hold of Matt, and there's bombs going off in the city. And she's at the hospital with Mrs. Cardenas and Foggy as they're both hurt and getting patched up. But doesn't know, they both don't know that he's Daredevil, right? So they're both just kind of like, yeah, he'll be okay. You know, even I forget he's blind sometime, how he rips around the city. And you're like, oh, well, he's blind, but he's also fucking Daredevil. So, you know, he sees a lot more than you know. But Matt, as Vladimir's like heart's dying out, he pounds his chest to get it back beating, and he's like, couldn't let himself die. And he's like, you just couldn't let yourself watch me die. He's like, no, I couldn't. But you're gonna talk, you're gonna tell me. And then all of a sudden, Fisk radios in and talks to the Man in the Mask in their first conversation between Daredevil and Fisk. And Fisk is like, we have a lot in common. Matt's like, we have nothing alike. And he wants Matt to kill the Russian and Vladimir. And Matt seems like such a rookie here talking to Fisk, and Fisk is like, you know, really dismantling him and with the decisiveness of his words, and you know, really showing that he is a kingpin and that Matt's just a rookie and starting out like a young man. He way over his head. He doesn't know everything he needs to know to take down Fisk. You know, he's severely underarmed and undertrained and undermanned, right? Like, he's just one man trying to make a difference, but Fisk has everybody in his pocket, so it's a very difficult task he has ahead of him here. But we find out Fisk framing the Man in the Mask for the cops, the bombings, you know, killing cops, killing the bombings going off. Everything is going to be blamed on the Man in the Mask, and Fisk will be clean of all this again. So Matt's making the news, and very bad press for Mr. Man in the Mask here. And Vladimir helps Matt lift the big giant grate so that they can escape through the access tunnels. But more dirty cops come after them, and Matt takes out the dirty cops. Those dirty cops come and kill that rookie cop that Matt, you know, had tied up. And, you know, so that poor rookie didn't do anything, you know, just told these people back up, and Fisk's dirty cops come in and go, oh, officer was killed, and then stab him in the neck and let him bleed out. Like, what? Vladimir says that he will stay behind and deal with, you know, whatever else dirty cops come through. And Vlad gives Matt Leland Owley's name so that Matt can go hunt down, you know, Fisk's accountant and further pursue his hunt for Fisk. And Vladimir presumably dies and or maybe kills all these cops, but, you know, definitely goes out fighting and shooting as he's getting killed, and he's like, you know, but poor Vladimir, he really was a real one. But we lead us into episode 7 titled Stick, and Stick here is Matt's mentor, former mentor turned, you know what I mean. He is an old man that is blind like Matt and teaches Matt the way of the blindness. But this episode opens with Stick asking a man where the black sky is, and we're going to learn more about what the black sky is this episode, and cuts off his hand before killing him after getting the information he wants. The Man in the Mask, after making his big scandal in front page news the last episode, he is now getting the moniker the Devils of Hell's Kitchen, leading him towards his Daredevil moniker that he'll get later in this season. But we see Matt go talk to Leland Owlsley after getting his name from Vladimir last episode, and gets tasered because he gets distracted by hearing Stick's walking stick coming up. And like I said, Stick is Matt's former mentor, trainer, teacher, you know, that have showed him the ways of how to harness his abilities. And it's been about 20 years, we find out, since Matt has seen Stick and Stick left him. And Stick tries to warn him and say, listen, you know, if you're going to be fighting crime and doing this Man in the Mask thing, you got to get rid of all your attachments, all your friends, anything you love. It will just get you hurt in this life, or they get hurt. You know, you got to forbade, you know, get rid of all attachments. Stick then says, Matt, you are a warrior. And Stick's never been easy on him, even when he was a kid, but trained him to fight and, you know, use all his senses to his advantage. And Stick says he was at war, never-ending war with the Japanese, mostly these days. And Matt's like, the Yakuza, not quite. The Hand, Yakuza ninjas, kind of the same, but, you know, kind of the Hand is who Stick is fighting this never-ending war against. And a part of the Hand is a man named Nobu, who is a part of the Union Allied group. And Nobu is a ninja and a very, you know, big assassin guy, you know, definitely formidable foe. Stick needs Matt to stop using the half measures, he calls it, and Matt's no killing rule. And Matt says he'll work with Stick, but no killing. And Stick's like, you're a pussy. But, you know, agrees to not kill anybody, but he's lying straight through his teeth because Stick's a bad man. Karen's trying to find legal connections to help Mrs. Cardenas, and Foggy helps save her from these guys that were following her and part of Fisk's men. Matt and Stick go to a container yard where Matt takes down a bunch of Nobu's men while Stick handles the Black Sky, which we learn is a boy with some kind of dark powers. And like, he's chained up, he's just a child, but like, you know, he's a dark sky for a reason. We don't necessarily see his powers get unleashed, but like, this is a powerful, dark little child. And then we see Stick tries to kill the boy with a bow and arrow, but Matt hits the arrow out of the way at the last second and then tries to, you know, fight off all the other guys. But we learn that Stick tracked down the boy after Matt was dealing, you know, with the guys and killed him anyways. So Matt, you know, just bought the kid some time, didn't necessarily stop him from killing him. Matt asks Stick why did he leave all those years ago, and Stick says he needed a soldier. Matty wanted a father, and he couldn't be that for him, so he left. Matt and Stick then have a big fight in Matt's apartment, trashing the place, but Stick leaves saying, you know, nice catching up, you could keep the wooden sticks. But Matt, when cleaning up the rubble, finds the little bracelet from the ice cream cone wrapper from the early scene in this episode where Matt first met Stick. And, you know, he gave him a bracelet which caused Stick to leave because Matty needed a father. But apparently he kept this little bracelet the whole time, and Stick really did care about him. But, you know, wouldn't tell him, but he does care about Matty. But this episode ends with Stick talking to a long-haired man with scars all over his back. And, you know, this man asks if he'll be ready when the time comes. And he goes, I have no idea if he'll be ready or not, you know. And I don't know if that man, you know, that scarred up man that Stick's talking to ever returns. I don't think so in Daredevil. Maybe in the Defenders series. I still need to watch that myself. But, you know, maybe that guy comes back and born again. Who knows? We then cut to episode 8, titled Shadow in the Glass. And this episode opens with Wilson waking up in the middle of the night having a nightmare. And he goes through his morning routine with classical music, and he's making an omelet, and he picks out a suit and then sees a childhood version of himself covered in blood in the mirror. And this is clearly teasing Wilson's backstory of like more of his childhood story and, you know, his origin story that we learn more about this episode. So this episode title is referring to Wilson seeing the shadows of his past in the mirror glass, you know, is what the title is referring to. But then we see Matt tells Karen and Foggy that they cannot be foolish messing around with Fisk and that they need to be smart, they can't be kids, you know, like, and he's trying to keep them safe, but he can't also then tell them like, hey, I'm Daredevil fighting him, you guys be safe, I'll take all the risk, you know, like, you can't just say that to them. So, you know, they're like, what, will be safe? You're the blind guy that looks like he's hurt? Like, okay. We see that Nobu is very upset with Fisk because Black Sky got killed and they can't just necessarily find another Black Sky that easily. They're very rare. And Fisk is like, maybe if you told me how important your cargo was, I could have helped you protect it in the first freaking place. And so, you know, Nobu's like, I'm gonna kill you. I'm thinking about all the ways I'm going to do it right now. We see a flashback, a young Wilson Fisk, and his father had political dreams, much like Fisk as well, and he wanted to be a councilman, but he's also a very hard ass on his son. We learn that Bill Fisk took a loan from Rigoletto, which I think was the same type of guy that Battling Jack Murdock took a loan from, wasn't it? And they're hammering, making signs that hammer may come back later, who knows what for, I don't know. But we see Detective Blake wakes up from being unconscious, and Fisk asks Hoffman to kill his partner. And his partner's like, I've been partners with him for 35 years, I've known him all my life. You know, he's like, how much are each of those years worth to you? So he, you know, tells Detective Hoffman, the other of the two dirty cops, to go kill his partner as he's like, you know, just waking up from being unconscious in the hospital. And he, you know, ejects him with some thing that's supposed to kill him, but the partner like wakes up as he's doing it, and then Matt, as the man in the mask, comes through the window and kind of, you know, chokes out Hoffman to, you know, make him unconscious. And then he says his partner's gonna die, but his partner right before dying gives Matt all this information on Fisk, and now they don't know, but Hoffman is able to spin the story that it was the man in the mask that killed Blake and, you know, put him unconscious and not him that did it. So, you know, they're still, the cover's not blown in that sense, and they're just further painting the man in the mask as this worse and worse guy. But Matt knows the truth, and we as an audience know the truth, but the people of Hell's Kitchen don't. We then meet Melvin Potter, a suit maker that has been making the armored suit for Fisk, We then see a flashback of young Fisk upset with some bully was picking on him, and his mom's like, eat some cake, you know, you'll be okay. And his father walks in like, why are you fattening him up? That's not going to help him do anything. Tell me what happened. And, you know, he tells his father that this guy was calling him and his dad both losers. And Bill Fisk takes young Wilson to beat up his bully and makes him keep kicking him and keep kicking him, keep kicking him. And Wilson didn't want to keep kicking him, didn't want to fight him at all. You know, he's like crying, but his dad's yelling at him, so he's got like this trauma of this abusive father, but also like the only thing that's making him, his father, not beat him or beat his mother is him doing what his father's telling him to do, which is beat up this bully. You know, so Wilson's, you know, not necessarily wanting to, but, you know, having this rageful, attacking, you know, wanting to hit things energy that's been inside of him since he was a boy. And we see that this memory flashback that of Wilson kicking this man and his father making him do it is the nightmare he keeps having every night and waking up and looking at the rabbit in the snowstorm painting from Vanessa, and that's what like calms him down and what ends up then starting his morning routine that we saw at the start of this episode. But we see Wilson has a meeting with Madame Gao, and she says she speaks all of the languages. And she knows that Wilson doesn't need Wesley to translate for him. He knows exactly how to speak her language and just pretends that he doesn't know as much as he does. And she respects this, but she also tells him to restore his house to order or she will not be working with him anymore. And this makes him very mad. He flips the table and tells Wesley to screw off, I don't want to see you, you know, leave me alone. And we see another flashback of Wilson's father making Wilson stare at a wall, a white wall, inches away from his face, much like the rabbit in the snowstorm painting, and makes him stare at the wall and says, my son, think about what you want to be. My son should be a king, not some fat little pussy. And you're like, oof, this dad is tough. And then he starts beating his mother, right? He's about to leave the house and the mother starts like, well, how are we going to pay for this? You don't have the money. What do we do? And he's like, Jesus, I get this enough outside. You think I want to get this in my own home? And he starts just wailing on his Wilson's mother, his wife, you know, Bill's wife, with his belt and just beating the crap out of his mother. And Wilson can't handle this any longer, so he decides to turn around and pick up the hammer that they were using to make those signs earlier in the episode and turns around. And the dad's like, you think you're gonna hit me with that? Whatever, you're a pussy. He turns around and he hits him on the back of the head. And then, you know, the memory of keep kicking him, he hits in. So he just keeps swinging the hammer as hard as he can, crushing his father's skull for beating his mother. Which, like, is this the worst thing? No, yes. I mean, he's terrible. He's I don't know. You kind of feel for young Wilson, but he's also a murderer, but you're also like, his dad deserved it, you know? So it's like very complicated characters that they're building here. We then see that after, you know, he kills his father, his mother doesn't call the cops and helps him clean it up and tells him to get the saw. And we see his mother saws up Bill's body and puts it into bags, and Wilson's telling, and this is a flashback, but he's telling this, you know, to Vanessa, and Vanessa's like, Jesus Christ, what happened next? Like, so those, and he's like, that's why I wear these cufflinks, to remember me that I'm not my father, that I'm not a monster, am I? And she's like, no, you're not a monster. He's definitely a monster. But young Wilson as a kid brought bags of his father down to the river, one per night for a week. And his mother then sent him away to a farm to live with relatives, and that's what we heard initially about his backstory telling to Vanessa, you know, a couple episodes ago. So just wild stuff. But we then go see Matt talks to Ben Urich in the rain as the man in the mask, and he wants to expose Fisk, and Matt says he would bet his life that Fisk is the man at the top, and Ben says, well, you're betting my life on it now too. Tell me everything you know. And then we see Wilson is having his nightmare and his morning routine, but now with Vanessa by his side, and it comforts him a little bit more, but he also takes a little second to get used to. He's like, I'm normally eating this omelet alone. I don't normally have a beautiful woman next to me. I normally am sweating and having a terrible night alone. I don't wake up with a beautiful woman next to me. Like, this is cool. This is nice. I can dig this, you know? We then see that Ben is writing a great story that's going to bring Fisk into the light, but Fisk is on the news getting ahead of the game and trying to control the narrative around his name and who he is. And he says, my name is Wilson Fisk, and together we can make this a better place. And the credits roll on episode 8, and you're like, oh my god, Fisk is so smart and so devious and so evil, you know, that he knows that they're about to try and expose who he is. So he's like, nope, I'm gonna get out in front of a camera and say, I am this great guy that just wants New York to be a better place. And you're like, dude, you're a murderer. You just crushed a guy's head with a door a couple episodes back. Like, what the fuck? Crazy. But episode 9, Speak of the Devil. And we open this episode on Matt fighting Nobu and getting cut up really badly. But we'll see more of this fight later this episode. And you're like, ooh, damn, this is a crazy fight. But how did we get here, right? And then so this episode leads us how we got there. And we see Matt goes to his priest to talk to him and take him up on that latte that his priest offered him a couple episodes back. You know, he goes to talk to him about the bad stuff he might have to do and asks the father if he believes in the devil, and the father tells him his beliefs on the devil, and that he believes the devil is inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, just a pawn in the game. The devil is just adversaries, the names that given to their enemies over the years, right? So if you know one side of one people was fighting another people, the people over here called their enemies, their adversaries, the devil. And then from years and years and years of these stories happening and being these people fighting different adversaries and calling their adversaries the devil, over years of this happening and stories being told from generation to generation, people mistook these adversaries as one monstrous figure of the devil, and that's how that kind of started. And I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting take on the devil. But, you know, also leading us to how Matt might be this monstrous devil figure, that leading us to the metaphorical ways that he is the devil of Hell's Kitchen. But yes, the father thinks the devil exists walking around in many forms. Ben fills in Foggy and Karen that Fisk has gotten out ahead of being dragged out of the shadows, and Matt walks in and meets Ben for the first time, so even though the man in the mask has met Ben, Matt and Ben haven't met, so this is the first time that they're meeting. And Karen says in this little meeting that she will take the devil of Hell's Kitchen over Fisk any day. And we see Nobu goes to talk to Fisk that he needs a specific block that Mrs. Cardenas has been living at. And this is why this has been a big problem for Fisk, that they need Mrs. Cardenas and her other tenants in her building to move out, because Nobu and the Japanese, you know, Yakuza, the Hand, whatever, need this particular block. And we find out why they need this block, I think, in early parts of season 2. But Fisk asks Nobu to handle their man in the mask problem. And Fisk also doubles the offer to Mrs. Cardena and her other tenants to get them to move out, and many of the tenants want to take the money, but Foggy says, no, let's fight, this is your place, don't take the money. And Mrs. Cardenas agrees, we will fight, this is my home. But, you know, Matt's like, that's a bad idea, you should have maybe told her to take the money, you know, like, Fisk isn't gonna stop at, you know, some deposition case. He's gonna, you know, make something really bad happen, more bombs, you know, who knows. But we know it ain't gonna be good because it has to do with Fisk. We see Matt trying to learn more about Wilson Fisk, so he decides to go to Vanessa's gallery. And she says that there's something really intimate in experiencing art through other people's eyes. She's like, that's a good line, you should use that, by the way. He's like, maybe I should, maybe I will. And, you know, just her little comments, like, Vanessa is the best. I do really fuck with Vanessa heavy, although she's with a bad man like Fisk. So I'm very glad that the same actress that plays Vanessa is coming back in Daredevil Born Again, and will have a big role, apparently. But as Matt's talking to Vanessa, Fisk walks in, and Matt meets Fisk for the first time, right? Because they talked on the walkie-talkie as the man in the mask and Fisk, but Matt and Fisk have never met personally. Although Fisk knows about Nelson and MURDOCK, and he obviously knows about Fisk, but they both don't know about the Daredevil Kingpin of it all yet. But Matt definitely knows he's Kingpin, you know what I mean? And they kind of have this little conversation, and Matt's like, listen, we shouldn't be talking. We're on opposite sides of a case, and I should go. I'll have to think about the cost of this more. But, like, he's so shook that, like, he was trying to get information out of Fisk, and then he walks in as he's talking about him, and he's like, oh my god, you know, like, has to shake his hand, and like, ooh, you know. So he takes off as quick as possible to get out of there. Matt returns to talk to his priest and asks him about seeing Fisk as the devil. And the father poses an interesting question and says, are you struggling with the fact that you don't want to kill this man but have to? or that you don't have to kill him, but you want to kill this man? And, you know, this is an interesting question that Matt now has to pose. Like, which side of this is he mad at? Does he want to kill Fisk you know, but can't, you know, or like, you know, does he not want to kill Fisk but has to, you know? Like, it's an interesting, you know, side of the coin. Like, if Matt just stands by, and does this guy just continue to kill and kill and kill more, and is that his fault? Like, so is that worse than killing a man yourself? Or, you know, like, Matt's really worried about his Catholicness, though. Like, if he will lose his soul and be damned forever if he decides to kill somebody. And it's like, oh, I don't know, man. It's an interesting question, though, that father poses. And he also says to him, maybe Matt went to see Vanessa to find a reason not to kill Fisk. You know, maybe that's why you went over there, to find some goodness in the man. But then Karen, Matt, and Foggy at the office get a call that Mrs. Cardenas was murdered and stabbed, and they say it was some junkie in the building, but you know it has to do with Fisk and Nobu and them trying to take over that building. And poor Miss Cardenas. She didn't deserve to go out like that. But when we cut back to the Nobu fight from the beginning of the episode, Nobu says that Daredevil is a worthy opponent and it will be an honor to claim his life. Ooh, so, like, you know, and we're intercutting a little bit out of his fight, but then we come back at the end to, like, the real fight. Karen, Matt, and Foggy are drinking and mourning Mrs. Cardenas' loss at Josie's bar, and all of a sudden Fisk comes on the news, and Foggy says, well, speak of the devil, which is the title of this episode. And we see Matt is finally fed up with everything and spends all night looking for Fisk and trying to find, you know, where he's going to be at, and ends up finding this building, and it's got Nobu inside, and finds Nobu instead. He goes, I was looking for Fisk, but I'll fight you instead and take your fucking head off. Nobu is a very talented, trained fighter, but Matt holds his own. But he starts to get cut up really badly, like we saw at the very beginning of the episode, but now even worse. We see more cuts, more stabs. You know, Matt's really bleeding and beat up pretty bad, but he's still fighting. And he ends up kicking back Nobu, and he falls into some gasoline that had been tipped over and leaking on the floor. And then throws one of his sticks into the light above Nobu, and it sparks, setting Nobu on fire. And as far as we know, killing Nobu by way of burning to death. And then Fisk walks in and is like, oh, good, you killed Nobu. And the man in the mask is like, what, you wanted me to kill him? I wouldn't be working for you. And Fisk is like, in a perfect world, you would have taken out each other. But, you know, Matt then gets a chance to fight Fisk in person. So now Fisk versus the man in the mask, and Matt sees that Fisk's armored suit in person, and that it, you know, he's now the one that cuts it and is armored. So he's like, oh my god, how am I supposed to kill this man? He's got armored suits. I can't even stab him even if I wanted to hurt him. But then Matt, because he's already been, you know, he's tired and cut up and bloody and beaten from Nobu, Fisk is fresh, right? Like, so Fisk really takes a beating on Matt now and does the classic double-handed overhand kingpin smash and then throws him through a table, WWE style, you know, yosses him through a table. I was like, Jesus Christ, Fisk and Matt head-to-head for the first time. You're like, Jesus, this is, give me more, I need more. And then Fisk leaves to let Wesley finish him off, and Matt knocks the gun out of Wesley's hand and jumps out of the window into the water multiple floors below. And we see once he hits the water, blood starts going everywhere because he's been really bleeding out and he's hurt bad. We then see Foggy is drunk and sad about Mrs. Cardenas, but he's knocking at Matt's door and saying, we gotta do something about it, Matt, we gotta get him. And then he hears a bang in Matt's apartment, and he's like, what happened? Are you all right in there, Matt? And he sneaks around the back door, comes in, and finds a bloody Matt in the Daredevil Man in the Mask outfit, and he passes out, and Foggy's about to call the cops, but he lifts up the mask and finds out that Matt is the Man in the Mask, and he's like, what? Matt? And the credits roll in episode 9, leading us into episode 10, Nelson v. Murdock. And Nelson versus Murdock indeed, because Foggy is very angry to find out that Matt has been the Man in the Mask the entire time. And Foggy starts to ask him, like, questions and like, are you even really blind? Like, how many fingers am I holding up? And it flips him off from like a foot away. And, you know, some funny parts of this episode, but you're also kind of like, damn, fucking, I hate to see Foggy and Matt not best friends, right? Like, this is heartbreaking stuff. Like, you need to see them together. Seeing them apart just doesn't feel right at all. We then see flashbacks of young Matt and Foggy throughout this episode meeting each other and their college roommates and, you know, getting to know each other more. And then Foggy, we learned, called Claire to help stitch up Matt. And, you know, Matt was like, he swung at him when he tried to call an ambulance, and he was like, made him call Claire. And Matt doesn't remember any of this because he was all like, you know, delirious and just fighting, even though he's bloody, you know, like it's a miracle he made it home after that, you know. But Foggy makes Matt tell him everything, you know, how he got his powers, and, you know, why he does this, everything. And Kingpin and Madame Gao talk up on that rooftop from Spider-Man 1 where Spider-Man like saves Mary Jane and like drops her on that rooftop in New York that always looked so cool, like green, and it had like a pool, and they're like sitting up on this rooftop on this little bench with like grassed in area, and he's like, duh, she just needs to use the elevator, don't mind her. And she's like, wait, who are you? Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man? He like flips off and like swings through New York. One of the best scenes in Spider-Man 1. That same rooftop is in Daredevil. So, canon, connecting the two, I think so. I'm taking it. Tobey Maguire Spider-Man and this Daredevil have been in the same universe the whole time. But Foggy starts to question everything he's ever known about Matt, and you know, is really struggling to, you know, have this reality check, like, oh my god, Matt's the man in the mask? Like, what? We then see that Ben is dropping out of the hunt for Kingpin because of a sick wife he's trying to take care of, but Karen talks Ben into going to see her lead, which is she found Wilson Fisk's mother isn't dead, but in a nursing home. And they get his mother, to tell them the truth about Wilson's father and childhood and stuff like that, and, you know, she's a dementia-ridden old lady, but, you know, they still get some truth here out of her about Wilson Fisk. But the fact that they're at Fisk's mother's nursing home and not thinking that he could be watching them or whatever, like, dangerous for them to be fucking with Fisk's family like this and his mother, like, ooh. Matt then tells Foggy the first time he put on the mask was to beat the crap out of a father that was sexually assaulting his daughter, and he tried to stop them with like Child Protective Services, but the father was good about it and did it in a way that didn't leave a mark, and this really pissed off Matt. It really pissed me off too, but I was like, alright, well, if you're gonna get into Daredevil and fighting and smashing people's face in, might as well have been, you know, beating the hell out of some pedo child sex offender, you know, like, especially a dad to his daughter, like that. This is a guy that deserves a place in hell, you know, and should have been killed. But Matt doesn't kill people, he just beat the crap out of them and says, if you ever touch your daughter again, I'll know about it. And Matt says that the guy spent a month in the hospital eating through a straw, and Matt never slept better. And Foggy says maybe all this is just an excuse for Matt to hit somebody. And, you know, he's not wrong. But then we see Fisk at a gala, gives a big speech, and it's a fundraiser for his organization. But the champagne is poison. And Vanessa is one of the few that pass out from the champagne. And Fisk catches her as she's falling and foaming at the mouth. And you're like, oh my god, Vanessa's gonna die here? What the fuck? Foggy says to Matt, I didn't need you in the mask, you know, I just needed you as my friend. And he kind of like tears up as he says it and then storms out. And then we cut back to one final flashback of Foggy and Matt at Josie's deciding to be partners with Nelson and MURDOCK, and he drew on a napkin Nelson and MURDOCK for like the first sign that they were going to be partners in this law firm. Oh man, Foggy and Matt need to be together. And then we cut to the present day of that sign of Nelson and MURDOCK that Foggy made, throwing it in the trash can, and Nelson and MURDOCK is no more. And you're like, no! As the credits roll, as we head into episode 11, The Path of the Righteous. And we find out that Fisk is rushing Vanessa to the ER to try and save her life, you know, and, you know, she was poisoned by that champagne or whatever was in the champagne. And Karen then goes to Matt's place to check up on him. No one was at the office, so she's worried. So she walks in and sees he's messed up and the place is trashed and he's all cut up and bloody and walking like he's really hurt. And she knows he's lying, but is worried and cares about him. And, you know, he's beat to hell and has the audacity to tell her, hey, be careful, you know, I don't need you getting hurt out there. And she's like, looks at him all beat up and blind and is like, yeah, maybe you should take your own advice. And then she goes, oh yeah, I brought you a balloon, and we get this great shot of Matt holding the balloon sitting in his apartment, and I couldn't find the picture of it, but it's a great shot. It's always been one of my favorite shots from season 1, and I'm just like, oh man, Matt's hurt and beat up, and it's like, here's your birthday celebration balloon, but it's not his birthday, and it's just kind of like a get well soon, and you know, his friends are hating him, he's got no family, and he's just like all messed up. Poor Matt, really going through it at this time. We see that Foggy went to Marcy's place after him and Matt had a falling out, and old Foggy here was getting a little action from Marcy. We then see Claire comes over one more time to stitch up Matt and see him one last time, and she says she's going away for a while and maybe won't be back, but maybe we'll see her in Defenders or Luke Cage or Iron Fist or maybe Jessica Jones, maybe all of them, who knows. Claire is one of those characters that likes to return. Ben and Karen talk, and Ben thinks someone is trying to kill Fisk and says in all the years of him writing about crime, if there's one thing he knows, it's that you don't get to the top without making enemies. And then we cut to Fisk saying whoever did this to Vanessa, he will salt the earth with their blood and task Wesley on finding out who did this. And Matt goes to talk to his father, the priest, and he says to him, if God made us all with a purpose, then why did he put the devil in me? And the father says to Matt, the devil is a symbol to be feared, a warning to us all to tread the path of the righteous. Meaning the title of this episode, but also like, hey, this is, you know, putting more of a clear image in Matt's head, like, hey, being the devil of Hell's Kitchen and having the devil inside of him maybe is his purpose, and his purpose is to make everyone else be fear the symbol of Hell's Kitchen and a warning to all to tread the path of the righteous. And then we cut to Matt meditating, trying to heal, but remembering all of the cuts that he got from Nobu and, you know, feeling each of them as he's trying to heal them with his mind. But he decides he's healed enough and it's time for him to get back out there in the mask. And he questions Turk, the guy we've seen since episode 1, and he pops up all over the place. He asks Turk where Fisk gets his body armor, leading Matt to Melvin Potter. Fisk then gets a call that Wesley takes for him so that he can stay with Vanessa and not be distracted and have to deal with the matter himself. So he doesn't tell Fisk about the problem with his mother. So Wesley just tries to handle it himself like a good little assistant that he is, but makes a crucial mistake later this episode. We see that Matt fights with Melvin Potter because at first Melvin's like, you know, just try not to be shot or killed by Fisk. And he's like, listen, after beating him up, he's like, listen, I'll protect you from Fisk, but you need to make a suit for me. So good, finally Matt's going to get a Daredevil super suit that's more than just a mask over his eyeballs. We then see Karen finds Foggy drinking at Josie's bar, and she's like, where have you been all day? Why haven't you been answering the phone? And he's like, why did I need to go to the office? It's not like we have customers, so they're all fighting, and you know, and Foggy says that him and Matt are going through a rough patch. She's like, I found the Nelson and MURDOCK sign in the trash. And he's like, a really bad rough patch, okay? Like, but hopefully him and Matt figure this out, because like I said, it is very sad to see Foggy and Matt not best friends. Karen then calls Ben to thank him for everything, and he finds some evidence of Bill Fisk's campaign signs. And then we see Karen gets taken, and we find out that she was taken by Wesley. And, you know, Wesley clearly had found out from her mother that this woman came to see her, and Wesley is trying to take care of this. And he like, threatens her and tries to find out more information, puts a gun on the table, and mistakenly gets the gun, you know, the phone starts to ring, and he looks away for a quick second, and Karen doesn't hesitate at all and grabs the gun. And he's like, well, do you think I'm stupid enough to put a loaded gun across from a table from you for where you could reach it? And she like cocks it and goes, I don't know, are you? And then he's like, you know, trying to talk his way out of it, and she shoots him. They just keep shooting him, unloads the clip, and you're like, oh my god, Karen just killed this man. But it was clearly in self-defense. I mean, he did kidnap her, but like, no hesitation, Karen killed this man, and this is the end of this episode. You're like, holy shit, credits roll on this episode, and Karen's a fucking killer, but she kills Wesley, and he deserves it. Kills him with his own gun, too, and like, the images of this are freaking great. We then open with episode 12, The Ones We Leave Behind. And this episode opens with Karen throwing the murder weapon that she just murdered Wesley with last episode into the ocean. And she goes home and immediately finds the first bottle of booze she can find, and then showers, tries to go to more booze, tries to sleep, but sleep's not working. So she tries to go for more booze, gets a beer from the fridge, and turns around, and Fisk jump scares her, and Fisk is in her house and, there to kill her. But we realize that this is all a nightmare that she's having, so she decides to go into the office in the middle of the night and just give up on sleep. And Foggy is there and scares her again because she doesn't realize he's in the office. And she's like, "What are you doing in the middle of the night?" He's like, "Last time I checked, this is my office. What are you doing here?" Matt then comes in the middle of the night. It looks like not a lot of sleep is going around, and he makes it all awkward, and Foggy decides to leave. But Matt asks her if something happened, and she says, "Yes, the world fell apart. Didn't you notice?" But he can tell just from her voice and that she killed somebody and that it changed her fundamentally, and he can sense it. We then see that Vanessa wakes up in the hospital after being poisoned by the champagne last episode, or 2 episodes ago, whenever that happened. And Fisk tells her that he has set up something for her to go away. And she goes, "Will you be coming with me?" And he's like, "No." And she's like, "Well, then I'm going to be staying by your side. And, dangerous or not, I will be here by your side." And Wilson's like, "Well, I'm going to find whoever did this and make them pay." And she's like, "You better fucking." He's like, "I'll make them suffer for what they have done." And she says, "I expect nothing less." Oof. And I'm like, what a perfect little pair, but devils, little devils. One of Fisk's men finds Wesley's body all shot and, in the place where he brought Karen to. And Fisk goes to see Wesley's body and sit next to it. He's like, "Oh no, my friend, I can't believe you're dead." And, sitting there touching him and shit. Very weird. But also, a kingpin mourning his best man, getting shot and not knowing why, and being like, "What happened here?" And he checks his phone, and the last call that Wesley had made was to Fisk's mother. So he's like, "What's happening here? Who killed him?" And Fisk's trying to figure it out. Matt, as the man in the mask, goes to talk to Ben Urich, and Ben tells him that he should get a better suit. Matt's like, "I'm working on it." And leading us to, it's episode 12, and he still hasn't gotten the Daredevil suit. And we're like, all right, it'll be coming to the finale. And Matt tells Ben to be careful. Fisk's an animal, and they're backing him into a corner, which is very true. And it's becoming very dangerous for everyone involved, that Fisk is a powder keg ready to explode. But Matt tracks down the blind couriers that were he found a couple episodes ago, that he sees where they were delivering to. And while Fisk is asking his mother who came to talk to her, but her brain is kind of scrambled and dementia-ridden, so he can't really get a straight answer out of her who came to see her, Ben goes to turn in his paper, his report that he is going to put out in the bulletin, and his boss accuses him of it not being good, and then Ben accuses his boss of being paid off by Fisk. "How long have you been paid off?" But we find out later that his boss really wasn't paid off by Fisk, but he thinks at this current moment, and so do we, that his boss is one of the people that Fisk is paying off. And he's like, "Anytime I write a thing about crime in this city, it won't get pushed through. So how long have you been on his payroll?" And he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about. Your writing just hasn't been good. That's why things haven't gotten in the paper. Not me. Blame yourself." So the guy's got a point, but at the same time, you're like, ooh, uh-oh. And so as he's accusing his boss of being on Fisk's payroll, Ben ends up getting fired in the process. So he's no longer working at the Bulletin. Matt then finds Madame Gao's warehouse and fights off her guys to question her about Fisk, but she's much stronger than she looks and knocks him back, and you're like, whoa, this little old woman just knocked back fucking Daredevil? What happened there? But Matt gets all the blind workers out of the building that's on fire and now being blown up and burning down. And so Matt burns down the Chinese heroin operation that ran by Madame Gao. But as Matt's fleeing the scene, he has an encounter with Officer Brett Mahoney, who is Foggy's childhood friend that we've seen a couple times throughout the season, and will come back in season 2 as a Detective Mahoney, but currently he's Sergeant Mahoney. And he tells him he is not the bad guy and that there's a lot of dirty cops in his precinct. We find out that it was Leland Owlsley and Madame Gao that wanted to poison Vanessa to get her out of the picture to get Wilson's full attention again. But Fisk still thinks the poison was meant for him. But wait till he finds out. Oh boy, they are in trouble. Ben goes to talk to his sick wife at the hospital, and she tells him that the Bulletin never deserved him. And he calls Karen to say he's going to start writing articles anyway, but just post them on the internet and not necessarily have to need to post them with the Bulletin. So he just goes home and starts to write his thing. We see a little Easter egg at Ben's, one of his articles that he wrote back in the day about the Battle of New York, which is an Avengers Easter egg. Also tying that this is the same universe as Avengers 1, and Daredevil exists in the MCU, and Daredevil Born Again makes it officially official, even though it's been official since like Hawkeye and No Way Home and Echo, so he's been around, She-Hulk, but now it's officially official that this Netflix Daredevil show and Daredevil Born Again is canon to the MCU, baby. And, but little Easter eggs like this was what made us think that it might have been canon in the first place, right? So love to see little stuff like that. But Ben sits down at his computer to start writing an article, and we see that Fisk is sitting behind him in his house, and Fisk murders him with his bare hands and steps on a picture of him and his wife as the credits roll and Ben's murdered in his living room. And you're like, holy shit, Fisk is an absolute psychopath murderer, and yeah, deserves the worst. And now the final episode of Season 1, titled Daredevil, Episode 13. We open on Ben Urich's funeral. Poor Ben. We find out that his life insurance policy that he took out in case something like this happened, though, will take care of his sick wife, so that's good. But very, very sad at this little funeral here. And Matt blames himself as he's talking to his priest. His priest's like, hey, how you holding up? And he's like a good Catholic boy. And he's like, oh, that bad, huh? So Matt blames himself for not stopping what's happening in the city. Very sad that Ben's gone. Ben was an OG. I really love Ben Urich, but this makes this a good show, because if nobody died that was close to Foggy and them, the show wouldn't, feel impactful as it is, right? Like, they lose Miss Cardenas, they lose Ben, right? Like, they have some hits that are close to home, and if they don't have those murders or those effects close to home, then this doesn't hit as hard as it does. I don't think so, at least. But it is heartbreaking to see his widow's all sad, crying, and Ben's dead. Oh, it's all a mess. But we see Fisk finds out that Leland is stealing money from him and has the dirty cop. Leland, as a insurance policy for himself against Fisk, he kept the dirty cop Hoffman and hid him away for dirt on Fisk, and Fisk loses it, and and Owlsley thinks he's just gonna walk away out of this and take half of Fisk's money and just survive and make his just go on with his day. And Fisk loses it and pushes Leland down an elevator shaft, killing him, and he sends men to kill Hoffman, the detective that is being kept by Owlsley somewhere in the New York. Matt and Foggy talk for the first time since having their big fight, and they try to work out their shit and find a way to move forward. And then they go and talk to Officer Mahoney, and Matt overhears another officer on the phone saying, one of the dirty cops saying, oh, we'll find that rat bastard Hoffman, we'll get him, we gotta find him in the city. And they go and take off for Fisk trying to go find Hoffman, and Matt overhears all this. Karen's happy to see Foggy and Matt working together again, and it's what we all love to see the most, honestly. But Matt then goes to find Hoffman and beats up all Owlsley's guys that's holding him, and tells Officer Hoffman, Detective Hoffman here, go turn yourself in to Officer Mahoney and make a statement on his involvement with Fisk. So they finally get some concrete evidence on Fisk with Detective Hoffman's statement here, and we then see a montage of arrests, and Turk gets arrested, and all these people start to get arrested that are involved with Fisk and the crime, everything that's been happening in Season 1. And we don't see Ben's boss get arrested, but a woman that was working in the Bulletin was arrested. So there was somebody on Fisk's payroll in the office, but it wasn't Ben's boss, so he's still a good guy. He'll return in Season 2. And then we also see that one of Marcy's bosses, that was the company Landman and Zach, that was, had Wilson Fisk as a client, they were apparently arrested as well. And the FBI is arresting all these people, and they come to arrest Fisk. And as he's getting arrested, he decides to ask Vanessa to marry him, and like doesn't get down on the knee, but asks her to marry him, and like hands her the ring, and you know, says, "You are my heart, you're my everything." Yeah, and you know, so glad to see that Vanessa's a big part in Daredevil Born Again and still going to be a future part of this series, and she's not just like a one and done character in season 1 here. Like season 1, 2, 3, she's around and she's awesome. I love Vanessa. She's a good part of this show. Karen, Foggy, and Matt have a drink to celebrate taking down Fisk, and they all toast to Elena and then to Ben and for everyone that they lost, and Matt says to everyone else that that son of a bitch hurt, and they give a toast for celebration to arresting this man. But things can't be that easy with Fisk, and then Fisk is in the back of this police van and he's talking to these other 2 officers or FBI guys, and Fisk starts to tell this great story, and you know, moral of the story is that he goes, "I am not the good Samaritan in this story. I am the ill intent," you know, and like really intense monologue, but it was so good. And like this is one of the many reasons Wilson Fisk and Vincent D'Onofrio has made this character into a household name, right? Like so good. Every time he speaks, every time he moves, dialogue, it's all fantastic when it comes from Vincent D'Onofrio's mouth, and it's spoken as Wilson Fisk. Fisk's guys come to break him out of his prison van and start a firefight with the cops and bust Fisk out of his police transport. And we see Matt goes to pick up his suit from Melvin, and the Devil of Hell's Kitchen suit is finally, we're going to see Daredevil costume. But I was like, geez, a little sense of urgency, Matt. This guy's escaping. But Matt stops the box truck by throwing a baton at the windshield, and the box truck like tips over. And I was like, wait a second, this like box truck that was like transporting Fisk looks a lot like the Tracksuit Mafia, which is the same organization Fisk was working with in Hawkeye, but way back in Daredevil we just weren't talking about them as the Tracksuit Mafia. But very funny that the Tracksuit Mafia is still, you know, a actual thing in the MCU, and I loved the Tracksuit Mafia from Hawkeye. They were so funny. Bro, come on bro, trust the bro moving company. What's up bro? You know, like, whoa, Kingpin bro, he's my boss bro, you know. But we finally get to see Daredevil finally suiting up and kicking ass. It only took all season, and we get Daredevil versus Kingpin, and Fisk says, "I'm gonna kill you for what you've done," and Matt says, "Take your best shot." And they have a full-on fight, and Fisk is like always been freakishly strong, and even more so in the MCU, but you know, gets you know, it takes an ass kicking to Matt, but then, you know, starts getting his ass kicked a little bit by Matt. And Matt looks like he's getting beaten, but ends up holding his own and ends up winning the fight. And we see that Mahoney pulls up to see Daredevil in his new suit and arrests Fisk. And Vanessa has to take off alone on her helicopter, but puts the ring on her finger so she'll return to be Fisk's love at some point in the future. Mahoney goes to him though, like, "Hey, you know, what should I, when I'm writing up my report, what should I call you?" And he sees Matt flip up onto some scaffolding and then flip up out of the alleyway that they're in. And he's like, "I couldn't have done that." So he writes up in his report that some daredevil stopped Fisk, and that now, thus report comes in that the Daredevil of Hell's Kitchen will be Matt's moniker, and where the Daredevil title of this episode 13 of season 1 comes in. But we see Karen, Foggy, and Matt hang the Nelson and Murdock sign outside of their law firm, and Matt goes and touches the sign and looks at Foggy and goes, "Ah, Nelson and Murdock, avocados at law." And just, you know, a funny thing from one of the flashbacks in one of the previous episodes. But attorneys at law, Nelson and Murdock, and they are back together and heading into season 2 now. But Matt says to Karen after Foggy walks away that, "Hey, there's been something in your voice, and I thought it would go away after we put Fisk away, but it hasn't, huh?" And she goes, "Yeah, you know, all we can do is try and move forward, and maybe we can do it together." And they kind of like hold hands, and maybe this is a start of Karen and Matt's relationship, and maybe they date in the future. I would like to. I really like them together as well. If it's not going to work out with Matt and Claire, it might as well work out with Matt and Foggy, right? Like I like, or Matt and Foggy, with Karen and Matt, right? Like I like that. And we see the end of this episode as Fisk is in prison in his prison white uniform, which we learn is prison whites for the newbies in season 2, and he is staring at a blank wall, just like home, and, you know, staring at a wall that reminds him of his, you know, Rabbit in the Snowstorm and is Vanessa, but he's in prison, and we see that Daredevil is out looking over the city and protecting the city as credits roll on season 1. And the season 1 Daredevil suit, I mean, it looks fine, but the mask, you know, this shot doesn't look bad, but there's other shots of the mask, especially from like front on, you're like, that looks so bad. Luckily, this is the one and only time in season 1 that we see the Daredevil suit, and it's, I believe, the worst this suit has ever looked. I mean, even the 2004 Ben Affleck suit from the Daredevil movie is better. You know what I mean? So this, in my opinion, is the worst Daredevil outfit, but they have progressively gotten better over time, and now into Daredevil Born Again, it seems like we're going to get some really cool different suits. So comment below if you're excited for Daredevil Born Again. I'm sorry this video was long, it's a big chunky one, but it's quicker than watching the entire season 1 of Netflix's Daredevil. So if you would like another recap, breakdown video of Daredevil season 2, much like this season 1 breakdown, comment below and let me know if that would be something that you would want to see, because this took a lot of effort to make and a lot of editing and a lot of time. So I hope you guys appreciate, me watching and taking notes on the 13 episodes so that I can recap it in a shorter, chunkier video for you guys. And going into Daredevil Born Again, we will be breaking down those episodes next week. So stay tuned for more Daredevil content. My name is Big Cam. Thank you guys so much for coming on by. If you'd like to follow my other social medias, down in the description below. Links in the description below. Big Cam, 2 G's in the Big, pretty much anywhere. Follow me on my Letterboxd if you want to see my movie reviews and my lists from the last couple of years of watching movies. Thank you guys so much. If you could support the channel by liking, commenting down below, subscribing if you're new, hitting that bell so you don't miss future videos and you get the notifications. Those all go a long way to supporting the channel, and I really appreciate it. Once again, my name is Big Cam. Thank you, beautiful people, for watching, and if you made it this far in the video, you're a fucking legend, and I love you to pieces, and I will see you, beautiful people, in the next one. Peace.